Okay, let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. If everybody take just a second and turn your cell phones off or silence them. And did everybody have a chance to look over the minutes?
I'll make a motion for approval.
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? If not, cast your votes. No, I wasn't here. Looked good to me. They accurately reflect I wasn't here. Thank you. Okay. Kathy, we got a couple of continuance requests.
We do. Item number 12, case number 13939 is requesting a continuance to October 16th, and item number 13, case number 13940 is also requesting a continuance to October 16th.
Anybody here on those two? Questions, comments? Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion for him to be continued.
Second.
Motion and a second. No other discussion. Cast your votes. Those two are continued. I didn't ask. Do we have any applicants here requesting a continuance? Okay. Kathy, go next.
Item number 1, case number 13942, application for special exception of Sharon Romaine Murphy to allow the continued use of a mobile home to serve as a temporary second dwelling to relieve a medical hardship located at 6201 Murphy Lane.
Good afternoon, council members. Thank you for letting me come before you. I'm here to request a continuance.
Excuse me, let me get your name and address. Just for the
Sharon
record,
Romaine
please.
Murphy, 6201 North Murphy Lane, Oklahoma City.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, I'm here to request a continuance of my medical variance. My husband passed away approximately 3 years ago, and my nephew lives in the other trailer, and he does all of the upkeep of the property now for me and changes light bulbs or whatever I need. And I feel fairly safe out there, and I don't think I need to tell you with everything that's been going on in Oklahoma City, safety kind of is high on my list. And I also have a sister-in-law that lives in front of me in walking distance, and we check on each other every night. So I feel very safe, very secure. I'm established there, and I'd just like to continue if it's
Do we have any
within
protesters?
power.
Based on the recommendation of the staff that they meet all the exceptions, I'd make a motion to approve the variance for 3 years.
Second.
Motion second. Any other discussion? If not, cast your votes. You're good?
Thank you so very much.
Item number 2, case number 13944, application for special exception of Alicia and Barbie Mendoza to allow the continued use of a mobile home to serve as a temporary second dwelling to relieve a medical hardship located at 8304 South Anderson Road.
Good afternoon. My name is Barbie Mendoza. I live at 8304 South Anderson Road, and we're just here to request that my mother-in-law continue. She's disabled, continue living there. I'm an AUA. I can check on her, and things been working so well for the last 3 years, we don't want to change anything. So if we could.
We have any protests? Questions?
Again, and based on the recommendation of staff, I would make a motion that the special exception be granted for a 3-year period.
Second.
And motion second. No other discussion. Cast your votes. You're good?
Thank you.
Item number 3, case number 13924, request of Shahab Amal for a variance to the nonconforming use regulations located at 1016 Northwest 24th Street.
Good afternoon. Philip Owen, 6907 Northwest 122nd, counsel for the applicant. It's my understanding that when my client was here about a month ago, there was some concern that one of these properties was vacant. I do have copies of the leases on all 3 of these properties, as well as photos of the properties to show their condition. This is a situation where he purchased this property. It has a duplex and a single unit on the property. It's assessed as such with the assessor, but he cannot get financing to refinance it, nor could he sell it because of the zoning situation where if that third individual unit is damaged more than 60%, it can't be rebuilt. He had it assessed last year, I believe, and it assessed for $42,000. The assessor's value on it is over $100,000. He paid $70,000 for it. We're simply asking for a variance to allow on the 60% destruction to allow, if that were to happen, that could be rebuilt. It's not going to change anything in the area. It's not going to do anything but relieve him of this hardship, which frankly I'm not sure why when he bought it this didn't come up, because he bought it for the full value, and now he's basically, it assessed for $28,000 less than what he paid for it. So we're simply asking for the variance to allow him to rebuild that should it be destroyed more than 60%, so that he can get the value out of the property and is not put to an undue hardship.
Do we have any protesters on this one? Does anybody have any questions or comments? 'Cause I got one question.
I have comments.
Okay.
I cannot support this application because I don't think that this property is appropriate for the 3 buildings that are there. I mean, the whole process of grandfathering things in is a way to provide some alleviation from a change in whether it's zoning or land use or conditions surrounding it. But if this property were destroyed in some way, over 60%, I mean, there's a reason why grandfathered properties have conditions on them. And I think this is a perfect example of why those conditions are there. If something happened to that 3rd building, it would not be appropriate for it to be rebuilt, in my view. So I would be opposed to changing what is now sort of a temporary variance, if you will, to a permanent variance on this piece of property. It's unfortunate that there's this financial catch-22 that the owner finds himself in, but financial hardship alone is not an appropriate basis for a variance. So I will not be able to support this.
I agree with financial hardship is not appropriate use for a variance, but you said you had photos of the property. I mean, I'd like to see it.
Sure.
That was the question that came up last time was, is this a bona fide business purpose with leases and photos and stuff? So
I have copies of the leases here, photos of the property. There's also a page in there where he sets forth the work that he's done on the property just this year. There's new roofs on both of the buildings, and he's done some interior remodeling on one of them, and they are fully leased as of today.
I think the question about whether they were leased or not really just had to do with the condition of the property.
I agree.
And I wasn't present at the last meeting, so I only know what my client passed along to me about what the concerns were.
My question is, if the variance is granted and if it is destroyed greater than 60%, with getting a variance, he could only rebuild the footprint. He couldn't expand.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly not, I honestly don't know the answer to this, but I don't know that he would rebuild all 3. It's simply if nothing happens and the property's not destroyed, nothing will change. This is simply to allow him the flexibility to do something with the property because, and again, I don't know why when he bought it, this issue wasn't brought up. The assessor assesses and taxes on 2 buildings there, and he's just caught in a catch-22. He's not asking to change anything on the ground as it stands today, just to get him out of this pickle.
I'd make a motion to approve it based upon the fact that there are no protesters, there's no unfavorable considerations that have been identified by staff, the unusual and unique nature of the property, and financial hardship.
I'll second that motion. I would just think that financial hardship
Is not.
it is not part of the
I'll withdraw.
consider thing. Okay, then I'll second it.
Okay, motion and second. Any other discussion? No? Cast your votes. Jana? Oh, there you go. Okay. All right, you're okay.
Thank you.
Item number 4, case number 13938, request of Tammy Ackerman for a variance to permit a building with exposed exterior metal located at 5905 South May Avenue.
Hi,
My name's Tammy Ackerman, and I'm here for the church at 5905 South May. I was here, and I guess this is like a continuance. It was pointed out to me, which I did not know, they had asked me when I realized that siding was needed on the building that we purchased. We purchased an upgraded metal on the body part of a church building, and paid extra for that, not knowing that that area was zoned for some sort of outside siding. And one of the gentlemen had asked me when I realized that it wasn't one of those things where we went in thinking, well, we'll do it, and then asked forgiveness. I went back and pulled my plans after it was brought to my attention that siding is marked on my plans, and it is in the red ink where they do at the city. They call redlining it in, I guess, or something. And they marked it and approved my plans and told me at that point that I could apply for a variance. And that's how it became to my knowledge. So we did purchase a building last February. It was erected, I think, around May or June of this year. It does have an upgraded siding. It sits behind a brick building, which used to be an old Brahms building, so it doesn't have total view from the street. And we were wanting a variance to see if the siding, the metal siding on it could be approved like it is.
The question last time was how it was labeled on the plans. Janice and I were wondering if that was something that the city would have made clear. JJ, I see the little, it says vinyl siding. Is that something that the contractor should have outlaid, or walk us through that?
Many times, someone will go ahead and show compliance on a permit, knowing that they don't want to comply, and will go ahead then and go and try and get a variance. But they show compliance to go ahead and get the building permit and get started, knowing that if it doesn't go well, they'll have to comply with the code.
And we would have, if I had known going into it, I would have never purchased the upgraded metal, and I really didn't have any knowledge, and that is my mistake, but I learned. So anyway, we were needing to see if we could. We have a small church, and it is, and I believe we can make a way if we need to, but we don't have a lot of finances. We kind of cater to inner city, so.
You've already purchased the materials, is that what you're saying?
The building's up. Yeah, it's been up.
In the past, haven't we had somewhat similar situation where we granted a variance for a term of years, for some limited period of time?
Well, I think we could use it as long as it was used for a church. Could it be this? Could we do that, Danny? I'd be inclined to support that because of the not-for-profit benevolent nature of that.
But to answer your question, in the past, we have done it limited to 3 years. They come back and tell us their circumstances, revisit it.
My packet has a letter or an email from Larry Jacks. Is he here? Have you talked to him?
We've talked to him not regarding this, but he had wanted access to that property before we erected our building. He wanted us to give him a right-of-way so people could walk across the back of our property instead of using his car wash lot. And I don't know if that is what provoked that letter. I really have no idea. I have not spoke to him. No, sir.
All right. Anybody here in protest? Does anybody else have questions or comments?
Given the not-for-profit status, I'd make a motion to approve the variance as long as it's used as a church. That way we don't put an unnecessary burden on them to have to come back and apply for another fee.
I'll second that.
Okay, got a motion, second. Any other discussion? If not, cast your votes. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Item number 5, case number 13941, request of Fairway Holdings, LLC, for a variance to the maximum height requirement abutting a residential district located at 13921 North Meridian Avenue.
Mr. Chairman, before we get started, after good counsel from our lawyer, Mr. Brummett, I have to recuse.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I need to make a record. After counseling with Councilor Brummitt yesterday, I'm a member at Gaillardia Country Club. I have no direct financial interest or equity interest in the club. Therefore, I think, and unless anybody in the audience objects, I'm allowed to participate.
Okay. All right, Tim, you're up.
Good afternoon. Tim Johnson with Johnson Associates, here on behalf of the applicant, Fairway Holdings, and with Fairway Holdings is Jeff Van Hoos here today. This is a, first of all, let me get these rounded around. Well, these are going around. The case before you today is really an issue of the fact that we have a piece of R1 zoned property to the east side of Meridian Avenue that's in the floodway, in the floodplain, and can never be developed, and therefore most likely will never be rezoned. Because of that zoning, it creates a situation where the setback of R4 to R1 pursuant to the code is 75 feet. The other surrounding properties, north, west, and south, we can meet that 75-foot setback criteria, but as part of the original agreement to acquire the property, the statutory right-of-way of Meridian was closed to allow for use of the treed area and private drive in that area. And so it's been part of the plan to utilize that area. So this really isn't a case of height, although everything you've read, if you've read the brief that's been provided, this isn't about a height variance to the proposed building. PUD 518 is the original Gaillardia PUD. It's been amended several times. We lie within parcel 15 of PUD 518, which allows for commercial, office, multifamily, and single-family residential. When it talks about height, with regard to building height, it specifically refers to this Oklahoma City code being the code that you have to abide by. There's no additional restrictions to height as part of the PUD. There have been, throughout the development of Gaillardia, which I've been involved with for 10 to 12 years, with the current developer, Mr. Phil Harrington out of Arkansas, there have been other height restrictions imposed around the development based on the developer and the covenants and restrictions being imposed to various tracts of land. However, this is not one of those. The brief that was provided discussed several issues relative to height and talked about other properties not being allowed to be developed as 4-story, that they were developed as 2-story or 3-story. And although we don't know the history of that, it could have been imposed by the covenants and restrictions, but it certainly wasn't imposed by the PUD itself. In this particular case, the developer signed an agreement, entered into contract, and closed on the property with a specific height of 4 stories with the ability to do a 3,000 square foot non-residential common space on the top of the building, being a 3,000 square foot mezzanine, for lack of better words. And that was part of the agreement. Signed contract. Project was closed on 07. You know, the economy took a dive, and so this project's been sitting idle. This red area that you see on the map that I gave you, only about the south half of that is really affected by our building. The 75-foot setback is what's shown in hatched because it's across from the R1 to the east. Spud 529 was a spud that I did for the owner of that property to allow him to have additional parking area north of the commercial development. But that was at the time, because of the floodplain and floodway maps, that's as far as we could take that. The floodplain and floodway maps have been slightly revised in 2008 So you can see there's just a little bit of extra property. He could potentially rezone, maybe add some more parking in the future. But beyond that, we actually met with the Corps of Engineers. They came to town to talk specifically about this project, or this property to the east, and they emphatically said that there's no way that creek's going to ever move. And so with the Corps and the FEMA, the owner of that land is stuck with whatever's developable at this time. So back to the setback issue, we are asking for a variance to the setback along our east, north 100 feet approximately of our east property line, to go from what would be, based on the city's code, be 75 feet. We're asking that to be pushed back to 40 feet. With Meridian being vacated and the likelihood of Meridian ever going through because of that large creek and the number of bridges, we're trying to reserve the tree buffer that's there and work around in that area. As you can see on this map as well, the other zonings in the area, one thing I want to point out is when the property was originally under contract, they started doing their due diligence late '06, and before they closed in February of 2007, Gaillardia offered up this Tract 2, which they zoned to O2, to allow them to mitigate that 75-foot setback from the golf course, which the golf course in the PUD is zoned R1. So the developer, Mr. Harrington, recommended that they grant additional property to allow this building to be constructed at 4 stories high. The contract has a picture of the building with the mezzanine on top. So you can see the dashed line is our parcel 15. This is the building to our south is the old cart maintenance facility for the golf course. They built a new facility at 150th Street, and this was sold to a private entity. You can also see on this image, and I'll show you in a better image, that there's really no residential around us in the very close. We're 1,100 feet away from the nearest house. If you look at the image, and I apologize, this is a little bit clustered, but our goal here was to try and to show you more as a offset to the brief that was provided about height and dealing with height. But as I mentioned, we're 1,100 feet to the nearest house. There are office buildings developed south of these ponds and fairway of the golf course, which you can see are much closer to these buildings. The heights of these buildings are in the 50-foot, 42-foot, 57 feet. They may be 3-story or 2-story, but they're tall. Our building will be less than 60 feet tall. And as I mentioned, we're nearly a quarter mile away. We're surrounded on the south by a former maintenance building. Floodplain and floodway divide us from the Gaillardia residences. This tract of land was intended to be developed as R4. And the only thing we're asking for is that 1,225 square feet of the building footprint to be allowed to be constructed in that corner, that red hatch area. I provided for you as well some photographs that were taken by our firm to kind of illustrate the first 4 pictures are kind of a panoramic view looking west and then northwest and then north. This is taken with a drone 50 feet above the ground to kind of illustrate from the top floor of the building what you see. You basically see fairway trees, tops of trees, and you can see the nearest house 1,100 feet away. The other pictures are from the interior of the residential looking back towards the south. This is the 3-story office building that's 57 feet tall to the penthouse, which is 480 feet away from the nearest house. This picture number 6 is the image from inside the residential area, just about at the fairway of the golf course, right behind the houses, looking back to our site, which is right here. And then the other images show, number 7 shows the The three-story office building. Number 9 shows another tall office building, all very attractive buildings. And then number 8 is a picture that's actually on the ground at 6 foot high, so it'd be your first flow out the window look. And if you're looking west, northwest, there's a tall band of trees that frames the fairway of the golf course. None of those trees go away. None of those trees are on the subject property. So there's built-in protection with the golf course from any views, even though this case doesn't have anything to do with the fact that we're building a multifamily building. I wanted to make sure it was clear that even if there was a validity to the protest of multifamily, or even a 4-story multifamily, that there's a lot of built-in protection with the golf course separating the project. So, you know, assuming that this, if we assume that this board does not see fit to grant us the variance, it does not affect the north, the west, and the south boundaries of this building. This building can be built in its entirety as proposed, 4 stories with the 3,000 square foot mezzanine, with the exception of this one red corner right here, pursuant to the PUD and the building code and subdivision regulations. And so with that, I'll entertain any questions you might have at this time.
Board have questions? Okay.
I got one
Go ahead.
question. The building in front of you, I'm familiar with, trying to look on it. So wait, what is the height of that building, the old maintenance barn? I'm trying to... 25 feet, is that the one that says 25 feet?
That's correct.
Top of the tower?
Top of the tower is 33, top of the roof it's a 1-story barn.
Right, and you're basically screened by the bank.
The bank is here.
Okay.
The new 3-story engineering building's here. It's 54 feet tall.
Okay.
And then our building will be north of the former maintenance barn,
Okay. Okay.
which is zoned the same as we are.
Right. Right. You're just asking for the red section labeled in
Correct.
that would be northwest corner.
That's correct.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. Let me turn it over, Mr. Groves.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Eric Groves. I'm an attorney. I represent the protestants whose names are on the brief that we submitted. I'd like to talk a little bit today about the legal issues that this case presents. We, in order to avoid any cumulative or repetitive presentations, we're going to limit ourselves today to 3 speakers. First me, and then Kent Gilliland, and then Jeff McDougall. I'm going to focus on the legal aspects of the case. Mr. Gilliland will focus on the facts as they exist on the ground. And Mr. McDougall will speak for the homeowners, including himself, who will be adversely affected should this variance be granted. What we're handing you are little notebooks. They have 4 sections. Section 1 is the PUD 518, which was attached to the brief. The second section is the applicable city ordinance that sets height setback standards. It's 59-6100.2. The third section is the application itself. And the fourth section are the covenants that run with the land in this area. There are 2 sets of covenants at Gaillardia. There's a whole set of covenants that govern residential development, and they've been amended. And then there's a set of commercial covenants. And so we put them in this notebook, not because the Board of Adjustment is in the business of enforcing contracts, but because they do pertain in a way, to what's being asked here. A little bit about the law. I may say some things that you know full well because you're in the business of dealing with variances. First, I want to say that if you looked at the application that I attached to the brief, it's not entirely clear about exactly what it is the applicant plans to do. We had understood this was going to be a 5-story building. I understood Mr. Johnson to say today that it's going to be 4 stories, but we really don't know. The application did not really make that clear. I also want to point out that applicant's presentation said nothing about hardship. Now, I'm going to say some things about hardship, but I think it is the burden of the applicant in a case such as this to demonstrate to the board that there is an unnecessary hardship. Nothing was really said about that. All of you are familiar with the 4 standards in the statute that govern variances. This board has authority to grant a variance where there is an unnecessary hardship created by application of an ordinance to this particular piece of property. Which ordinance is it that will impose this alleged hardship? Well, there are actually 2 in question. One is PUD 518, which, of course, is an ordinance, and it incorporates by reference a city ordinance, 59-6100.2, a table, which sets height limitations. So how is it that the height regulations impose a hardship? In the application, the applicant said that the hardship was based on a, quote, limited amount of developable land in the area, close quote. In other words, we can't find any other place to build these condos. I think the facts on the ground contradict this. There is land around to build condos in this part of the city, maybe not in Gaillardia. This was originally a 9.3-acre tract. Most of it has been developed, and the 1.9 acres upon which the applicant proposes to construct condos is left over after everything else has been developed. The applicant apparently wants the prestige of being in Gaillardia rather than build it someplace else. But the fact that he can't find another place to build it does not amount to a hardship. The statutes and the body of law require that conditions peculiar to the property be evident. Applicant has not presented any conditions that are so unique and so different to this property as to justify a variance. If we look back over the years in the body of case law on variances, we find that courts have upheld variances where conditions peculiar to the property were shown. By way of example, one classic case involved land which was prone to flooding, was not suitable for R1 development, but it would make a swell drive-in movie theater. Well, it wasn't suitable for much else, and so the court upheld a variance that allowed, and it wasn't harmful to any surrounding land, so the court upheld a variance for a drive-in movie. Also, if there's like isolated R1 land and it's surrounded by commercial land, and there's nothing else to do with that R1 land, no one's going to build a house there, a variance is appropriate, courts have upheld it. On the other hand, the courts have denied requests, such as an application to have a 3,000 square foot lot in the middle of a bunch of 6,000 square foot lots. That is not a condition that justifies a hardship, the courts have held. The courts upheld denial of a variance to allow a sign in R2, simply because it would be more profitable for the landowner. Added advantage is not a basis for a variance. Now, I suppose the economics of building condos are such that if you can build 4 or 5 stories instead of 2 or 3 stories, it will be a more profitable project, but finances are not the basis for a variance. The statutes also require that the applicant show that there will be no detriment to the public good and no impairment of an ordinance or the comprehensive plan. In this case, who is the public? Well, the public certainly includes the residential lot owners in Gaillardia, who will be looking at this building out of scale with others. It also includes the owners of the commercial properties in the commercial section of Gaillardia along Memorial Road. They too will be looking at a building that is out of scale. If you look at in the inside front cover of the book we just gave you, we have an aerial from Google Earth, and we have superimposed upon that area 4 red lines. And these 4 red lines indicate a 75-foot setback from the tee box. That little green area is a tee box. The people who are using that tee box are going to be looking up at a building which is inconsistent in terms of height with everything else in that area. The people in the condos will be looking down at the people in the tee box. This is not what golfers expect on the Gaillardia course. Will there be an impairment of an ordinance if the variance is granted? The answer is yes. PUD 518 incorporates the city ordinance, which regulates height. A variance in this case would breach the ordinance, would breach 518. This is bad because it sets precedent that could lead to other breaches and diminish the force of PUD 518 and the ordinance. If one reviews the design statement for 518, which hopefully you have, it reveals a series of provisions that are intended to preserve the character and integrity of the neighborhood. Homes which overlook a golf course obviously have a premium value. People buy those homes for a great deal of money so that they will have that value. There is an established 2-story skyline all around. All of the commercial buildings are 2 stories except for 2 which are 3 stories. There is nothing else. Now, the applicant may make more money with 5 stories or 4 stories, but he will do so at the expense of other landowners. The applicant can comply with the covenants and with PUD 518 and with Section 59-6100.2 and build 2 stories. Maybe not as profitable, but it will not do the damage that an out-of-scale building will do. It is very unusual, I think, to ask for a variance from a PUD. Most of the times people come in here and they ask you for a variance from an ordinance, something that might be prohibited in R1 district, for example, and they show a hardship. But a PUD is different. You know, a PUD is a custom-tailored, negotiated zoning district. It is an independent, freestanding zoning district, but no 2 are alike. They're all snowflakes. And we've got, 1,500 plus in this city. When one buys into land at a place like Gaillardia, one buys into that PUD. One buys into the covenants. Covenant, of course, is a contract. And when you buy land that's subject to covenants, you become a party to the covenants. You get all the benefits of those covenants. And when you buy into a PUD, you get all the benefits of that PUD. To come along later after having made that decision and to seek a variance from a PUD or to seek a variance from covenants is equivalent to asking for approval of a breach. If you buy into the deal, then it seems to me you should be prepared to uphold your end of it. Buyers know what they are buying into, and these are sophisticated people. They bought this land back in '07, and they knew what the rules were. In order to circumvent those rules, they have to show, have to meet the statutory standards, and they have not done that. So I think the variance should be denied.
Mr. Groves?
Yes?
I have a question. If you were going to engage in a complicated land transaction, wouldn't you have made a condition, and this is what I do in my business, wouldn't you have made the original contract on a condition of modifying the original PUD before you close on the contract?
Yes.
I mean, Janice, doesn't that come before the Planning Commission all the time?
Any other questions? If not, I'm going to turn it over to Kent Gilliland, who's going to bring you up to date on the situation on the ground. We do have some visual aids for you, by the way. Mr. Gilliland has one.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kent Gilliland. I'm an attorney at Hall Estill here in Oklahoma City. I'm going to move this easel over to the other side if I can. I'm right-handed, not left-handed. Okay, my purpose is just kind of give you the lay of the land. I know you guys are familiar with the Gaillardia community. It's basically a 640-acre community development right here, and really what we're concerned with is this south half, this red tag right here, and it's just north of the number 1 on the picture that you have. This is the applicant's party right here, and their property line cuts in about a third of the way in. This is the 4th tee box to this green. I represent Lenormand Properties, which is a wholly owned entity of David Lenormand. Mr. Lenormand owns buildings 4, 5, 6, and 8. And each of those properties is a 2-story building, with the exception of property 6. It's 3 stories, but it was built before the PUD was in place, and ironically, once the PUD was in place, it's in a parcel that permitted a 3-story building, so it's in compliance. Mr. Lenormand also happens to be a homeowner in the addition. I'm also here today for Jeff McDougall, who's going to speak in a minute for some of the other homeowners and himself, Bob Howard, Stan Carter, Steve Dobson, and Don Dahlgren. And I'm going to point out where their residences are on here. At the top, this is where Stan Carter lives. This is where Jeff McDougall lives. This is Bob Howard's home. This is Steve Dobson's home. And this is Don Dahlgren's home. Each of those homes, their back view is right at this particular piece of property, and it is a clear sight view, and Jeff can testify that in a minute. I believe he went out in his backyard this morning and took a picture. It's a clear sight view, so it's not a view that's completely blocked by trees. We think this actually is a case of height, and that basically what they've done is tried to pull an end run around the zoning ordinance by calling this a setback variance. If you put the setback variance at 40 feet, they don't satisfy the height requirements that are in the code for R4 property that abuts R1 property. Just flat doesn't do it. They can build 20 feet in 1 story. They make hay out of the fact that some of these properties are 57 feet, maybe theirs is going to be 60 feet. What they don't say is that the top of some of those properties is unoccupied. It's just, facade with a dormer or something at the top. It's not occupied space. They're 2-story properties.
Most of them are screened, aren't they, if I remember correctly? Like on top, there's some type of screening that prevents, from air conditioning. They're all screened to be
correct.
They're
all screened so that they're blocked. Right. That's exactly right. Now, when you look at here, there's 15 commercial properties in this south half. 13 of those properties are 2-story properties, 2 or 3-story. This one's 3-story, which is number 3 in your booklet, and it's in a different PUD. And this one's 3-story. We already talked about it. Everything else in there is a 2-story building. And now there's some debate whether this is a 4-story building or a 5-story building. I think what it's been characterized as is a 4-story building with a 5th unoccupied floor that could be a recreation room or exercise room or something like that. But in essence, it's a 5-story building. It's not a 4-story building. Right on top of this tee box. Now, if you change the setback variance, it does change the height requirement. At 75 feet, they can't build a 5-story building. So what they've done is sought the variance, changed the setback to 40 feet, yet it appears they still want to apply the height requirements that they could use at 75 feet. It's the only thing we can tell from their application because it's a little bit confusing. But they own this 1.9 acres, 1.7 of it is developable, This north part cannot be developed. Mr. Johnson told us that they had entered into a contract with Mr. Harrington's company, and in that contract, and they did provide us with an amendment to that contract, says that they can build either a 4 or 5 story building. I think said they could build a 4-story building with a 5th floor that was unoccupied. And that's fine, but that doesn't change the PUD that was already filed. I don't think private parties can contract to change a pre-existing PUD that already serves as a zoning ordinance. If I'm buying this property, I'm checking that out before I sign on the dotted line to make sure that I can develop it the way I want to develop it. And just because a seller tells me that I can do it, I believe I'm going to do a little bit more due diligence and make sure that under the existing ordinance that I can do it. And as a requirement to my closing, I'm going to ask that that be fixed, or we come out of escrow and we don't close. So anyway, the last point I'm going to leave you with is everything down here is 2-story. The intent of the development is to carry a low silhouette. I don't think there's a 5-story building north of Kilpatrick Turnpike, and this would be it. It's going to peer over into these backyards. It's going to block the view of these owners here, and for that reason we object and protest to that. Jeff McDougall now is going to provide some additional comments on behalf of the homeowners.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to say a few words about the variance that Fairway Holdings is presenting today. First of all, I'm here to speak on behalf of myself as well as the others that Ken had mentioned before, Bob Howard, Steve Dobson, Stan Carter, Don Dahlgren. Combined as a group in those 5 homes, we have over $25 million invested in our homes. I think we've all thoughtfully purchased lots at Gaillardia in the countryside estates in particular, and it's a very pristine area. And we have a significant investment, each of us, in not only money, but also in time and effort and thoughtfulness of what we've tried to create there. And when we purchased the lots, we did so with just one of the greatest amenities was the security, exclusivity, and the view that's out back towards the course. If any of you all have ever been there, I think you could attest that it's really the most prime spot in Gaillardia. Let me back up just a minute and let you know from my own personal self how invested we are in Gaillardia and our knowledge of just the neighborhood. We bought our lot originally in 2002, but I was living in Gaillardia as early as 2000. I lived almost 10 years prior before I moved into the countryside estates and built a home there. I was married at Gaillardia. And recently, earlier in the year, I attempted to purchase Gaillardia, and really purchasing it in defense of an outside party that wanted to purchase the club because it was in financial distress, again, to preserve the intent of the neighborhood and the investment that we all have there, both in our homes and as the members, and the atmosphere and the community that we have there. Right at the last minute, we weren't successful, but we gave it a valiant attempt, and so we feel like it's a great spot. This particular piece of property that is over here is really a result of what led up to the sale of Gaillardia. It was a financially distressed owner that proceeded over the years to carve off pieces of the club and sell them bits and pieces. If you'll notice, this particular piece shows a maintenance building up there. And for all the years that I've been a member of the club, that was just simply a putting green that was associated with the maintenance building. No entry, no talk about a house being over there or any other structure for that matter. When Harrington bought the property, they proceeded ahead to start carving pieces of the property off. They carved this little bit off and sold it to this group. They've taken that maintenance building actually and sold it and relocated the maintenance building down into the further end in the floodplain. They sold some floodplain acreage a little further down. They sold off different pieces of the residential along the way. So I don't think that it was ever contemplated that something would be here. And I'm actually shocked. I've never even heard of a contract between Harrington and this group that contemplated a 5-story building. Mr. Harrington entering into these kind of contracts, thank goodness for PUDs that protect private owners like us. We don't know what these people are doing. And when we first heard about this, I was pretty surprised that that was the case. The fourth hole at Gaillardia, where they're positioned in this building, is actually the marquee hole for the club. If you'll go out and look at some of the publication, they show that hole in a painting as the signature hole. And anybody that's ever played at the club knows that's the most secluded hole on the club. So we're going to take the most secluded hole on the club and drop a 5-story building in there that is going to be a straight-up shot and take it and make it the most disrupted hole by far. I think that is most golfers, if they had enough chance to get notice, which didn't get notice of this, we got notice of this through another method, you'd have a lot more people in this room today. And I think that this building is going to stick up like a pencil compared to everything around there. And it's going to be in direct line of sight for our home. One thing that this, if you were to approve this, is going to happen is this is going to create a third entry to Gaillardia. There's only 2 current entries to Gaillardia. They're both manned and guarded 24 hours. Well, one is 12 hours and the other's 24 hours, a set of gates. So now with the sinking of this building, which I understand is going to have 26 units in it. So if you assume 2 people per unit, there's 50 some odd people that are going to be here in this facility at any given time, and that could be possibly wandering around the golf course and have reasons to be up here, and now we have a third spot. So from a security standpoint, you know, my wife and some of the others are concerned about this being deposited in the corner. You know, I'm in the oil and gas business, and this is what we call in our business is called a corner shot, where somebody comes in and figures out a way to kind of weasel into the corner of something and stick something in there, and it's by far not the intended use. And I can promise you that everybody that has purchased a home along the countryside of States, that would not have been a selling point for us. The selling point has always been the serenity, the view out there. If any of you all would come out, it's strictly trees, the golf course. That's what a golf course is about. And through Harrington's financial issues, he proceeded to sell these things off one piece at a time to continue to get capital to finance what ultimately was a failure on his behalf. So I just wanted to let you know that from our perspective, we're concerned about our home values, we're concerned about our security, we're concerned about the original intent of the neighborhood and what this will mean to the neighborhood. We think it's really, in our opinion, kind of an abuse of the system to come in and try to build this 5-story albatross, and I'd ask that you deny the application. I thank you. Appreciate your time.
Anybody have questions, comments?
You know, I think Jeff Austin makes this point very well, and I don't agree with why when you buy a piece of real estate, you examine the PUD. If you have to modify the PUD, you have the PUD modified, you do your due diligence, that's your project. To come back 8 years and ask for a variance to the PUD, to me seems just, I mean, I build 86,000 square foot to 120,000 square big box buildings for our family. I do the research all the time. In the front end, it may take as much as 14 months to get a deal closed. I just think that from an economic perspective, to come back and maximize, their profit ability to do this, I think that should have been done 8 years ago. So I can't support this. I can't support the variance.
Okay. Are there any other protesters or?
Any other questions for me?
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other protesters? Okay. Ms. Johnson, you want to respond?
Again, and with respect to Mr. Harris, this is not an application to vary the PUD. This is the PUD specifically refers to the ordinance that Mr. Groves referenced, that the height restrictions per the city code. We're asking for a code variance in this 1,225 square feet. Has nothing to do with the PUD. The PUD allows for this development. The PUD was developed and approved back in 1995. It's a diverse development. You can see the size of these lots here versus these versus these versus the estate lots. They're mixed all in here. You know, the homes are different sizes. The intent of a PUD development, this is a mixed-use development. I didn't write this PUD, I know the gentleman that did, but that was the intent. The ability to develop in parcel 15 over here, as well as along the memorial frontage, was the ability to do commercial, office, upscale, and multifamily. It was designed in the PUD to allow multifamily. So it's not the question of multifamily. It's not the question of does a condo owner have less rights than somebody that owns a big estate lot? That's not an issue. It's the ability to develop in a mixed development parcel, the ability to develop an upscale condominium project that allows for people to live in a very nice area. We will not have access, it was specifically excluded, access to the club. We will not have access to the interior of Gaillardia. Our entrance will enter in off of Meridian. That'll be required to be extended from the dead end that it is now up to our property. That'll be paid for at the developer's expense. So we're really not, the whole concept of being a PUD amendment, that's not what this is. If it was a PUD amendment, we'd have gone to Planning Commission. This is a request to vary the city code relative to a setback. If you deny this, as I mentioned earlier, if you deny this setback, it doesn't prohibit them from building what's we're talking about building today.
But it prohibits the size of what you can build, and
No,
you're telling me you can still, if you don't have this setback variance, you can still build 4 to 5 stories?
Yes. All it does, all this variance affects is this little square right here. That's it. We're allowed to build what we're proposing to build everywhere else except for there. That's our hardship. It was inferred. I didn't specifically outline them number by number. It's a hardship to have to deal with an odd-shaped piece of property simply because there's a piece over here that couldn't be zoned, couldn't be improved, can't be developed on because of the Corps of Engineers and the flood zone. So does it make sense to take advantage of this little piece that they've paid for? Sure it does. We think that's a hardship. You know, if we can't develop it, we can still develop a 4 or 5 story. We can go up to 6 stories. There's no limit on height except for in the contract that was provided to Mr. Van Hoos. The PUD does not limit height. These other buildings that they claim that they only could do 2 stories, that's not in the PUD. They could only build 2 stories perhaps, because I don't know the facts, because Gaillardia said they could only build 2 stories or 3 stories. We don't know those facts.
But when the PUD is silent, the covenants, easements, and restrictions control, and they can be even stricter than city code.
That's true, but the covenants and restrictions do not prohibit the height that we're proposing. The height is only restricted in the PUD based on city code. And as long as we're 75 feet from everywhere around, we can go as high as 6 stories, except for by contract. So, you know, and we have, you know, we deal with these on Planning Commission all the time. We have multifamily projects that are much closer to residential than 1,100 feet. So are we really adversely impacting somebody who's 1,100 feet away, or a golfer that just wants to have a pristine hole at the expense of somebody who owns a piece of private property and has the right to develop it? I don't think so. You know, as I mentioned, the PUD wants diversity. It was designed for diversity. You can see by the plats, they're all diversity. They're all diverse in size. It doesn't matter if it's a 4-story or 5-story building. That keeps being brought back up. The fact is, we can build, per contract, the 4-story with a 3,000-foot mezzanine on top of the roof for everything in yellow except for this little red box. I'd be happy to answer any further questions.
Okay. Does anybody else have more questions, comments?
First of all, I would like to thank both sides for the materials that they provided. They were very helpful. But I do have a few things I'd like to say. I'm the newest member of the Board of Adjustment, and so there are times when I feel a little shaky about the decisions that I'm making and the basis for them. This doesn't happen to be one of those times. I do feel very strongly, having had a little experience on the other side of this horseshoe, that the purpose of the Board of Adjustment is not to let people do whatever it is they want to do unless we can find a reason to tell them no, or to make judgments based on whether there are protesters or not protesters to a particular application. There are standards that are set out by statute. They sometimes get sort of mashed all together, and they are interrelated and they overlap a bit, but they are very separate criteria. And probably the threshold criteria of them, of the four, is the question of hardship. I mean, it's very important, I think, that laws and rules and regulations that are imposed by governments apply equally to everybody. And there has to be some reason why they should not before they are varied. There are times when there are reasons why they should not because their specific application in a specific situation with regard to a piece of property that is in some way odd or unusual would create a hardship. And to me, that means something other than simply it's going to be more expensive to do something one way or the other, or that it would really be better financially or even aesthetically if we could do it a different way. To me, this is not a case where there can be any hardship demonstrated here by the application of the PUD and its reference to the ordinances that apply on height restrictions and setbacks and so on. The fact that PUDs are very specifically negotiated documents, they are ordinances in and of themselves. The fact that they make reference to existing ordinances rather than setting forth a specific number doesn't diminish the application of those standards, whatever they are, setbacks or height or whatever it is. The fact that a piece of property may not be able to be developed in a certain way that somebody believes would be optimal is not a hardship in my view. And I simply cannot support this application. So
I agree, Janice. I think that for the reasons I stated and the reasons you stated, I would make a motion to deny the variance.
I've got a motion and a second, and the motion is to deny.
So Green's to deny.
All right. Cast your votes. Okay.
Item number 6, case number 13943, request of Lance Luke for a variance to the landscaping requirements of the sign regulations located at 7007 through 7700 Southwest 44th Street.
Well, I'm Lance Luke, located...
Hang on just a second, wait. Okay.
Well, I'm Lance Luke, located at 205 Northwest 63rd Street in Oklahoma City. And we're just trying to get relief from the landscaping requirements around freestanding signs. On a large corporate campus, it stretches over 1.5 miles of road. So these landscaped areas require a lot of maintenance along this 1.5 miles of road. Some of the signs have varying slopes, so if the landscaping was provided, it would potentially block the view from the street, which would not allow for wayfinding throughout this large campus.
I see this case as similar to what we've done at Oklahoma City Community College. I believe there was a Baptist church down south that we did. I believe we did it at 15th and Robinson. But this is a campus-wide kind of concept. I think it's analogous to those cases.
I absolutely cannot support this application at all. The fact that landscaping has to be maintained is not, in my view, a hardship. The fact that they maintain their campus beautifully, which I'll grant you they do, is not a reason not to comply with the ordinance, in my view. Many of these, if not all of these signs, actually front onto Southwest 44th Street. There's a reason for the ordinance. I'm not seeing any reason here for a variance.
These signs stretch along the north of Southwest 44th Street. You can see it's very landscaped areas. There are trees and lots of turf along these signs that do provide landscaped areas. These signs match the building, so it's not necessarily just thrown in. It kind of ties the campus together as a way for vehicles to know where they're going. Emergency vehicles, it's very important to find which office they're trying to reach. And so the landscaped areas could, in some cases, block the view of these addresses, which I feel would be a bad thing.
I'm sure you'll make sure that doesn't happen. The fact that the signs are nice signs doesn't mitigate the need for the landscaping. The fact that you have other landscaping doesn't mitigate the need for the landscaping. The grass, though it's nice, is not considered landscaping under the code with respect to this requirement. So I'm just not seeing any reason here not to have the code apply.
Am I reading this? Did I read this right? Am I still reading it right? We've got appropriate landscaping, but for within 10 feet of the base of the sign.
That is correct. We provide well beyond what the code requires as far as buildings.
But you can look at the pictures that they've provided and see, the fact that there's landscaping over here or over here doesn't really speak to the point of the requirement.
Which we provide almost 85% over what's code required in these projects. It's just that 10-foot distance from the sign is what really isn't occurring.
JJ, haven't we in the past, based upon unnecessary hardship, allowed signs like this for St. Luke's and other churches that were trying to develop a campus environment?
Yeah, you have. It really didn't involve the landscaping. That involved the number of signs.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't see anything in here. We got a problem with the signs. It's landscaping within 10 feet of the base.
Yeah, it's a landscaping requirement that's specific to signs in the sign ordinance.
Okay. Within 10 feet.
And the argument is that the landscaping could, your argument is the landscaping being that close could block the signage or identifying like the accounting building or the procurement building. Okay. I think based on the public safety, I'd make a motion to approve the request.
Second.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. No other discussion. Cast your votes. Okay, looks like you come back next time.
All right, thank you.
I just feel compelled to point out that that same argument could be made in every single case, that the landscaping might interfere with the sign, and that if that is an issue with the sign code, that's where it needs to be addressed. The sign code needs to be amended, then that's the way that should be dealt with.
There's probably a couple other things in the sign code that could be adjusted, but I'm not volunteering. Thank you.
Item number 7, case number 13945, request of PDX Properties for a variance to permit a veterinary kennel with outdoor runs located at 13535 North Bryant Avenue.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Kleber, and I'm with Bacchus Payne Associates Architects, representing PDX Properties and Dr. Larry Woods and Dr. Steve Quillen, owners of the PDX Properties. We are requesting a variance to Chapter 59, Section 8300.11 to allow not so much exterior dog runs, but exterior play yards. The intent would be to have fenced-in areas adjacent to their boarding kennel, and as you can see in the drawings, their boarding kennel, their recovery room, and their isolation room for exercise yards. So the dogs would be allowed outside during the day to exercise, go to the bathroom, and then be returned to their interior dog runs or cages in the meantime. So the intent would be that all outside play or outside time would be supervised during normal business hours, and the dogs would remain inside the rest of the time.
Okay. What are normal business hours? If it was in here, I mean, is it 8 to 5 only? 8 to, Dr. Woods?
7 to 6.
7 to 6, okay. Okay, do we have any protesters? Does anybody have any questions or comments?
I asked staff if they would look up PUD 1533 for me, the property to the south, and the 2 tracts that most closely abut this property are designated for a congregate care and multifamily for over 50 or congregate care. So those 2 tracts are set aside for those uses. I again, can't support this application. I think that there's a reason why these kinds of uses are required to be kept indoors in a C3 kind of setup like this. And I've had a couple of cases, Planning Commission, that I've dealt with. I'm not sure I see the distinction between a dog run and a play yard, but I'll let that go for the moment.
Well, I
think that the fact that this is not a good location for this use doesn't mean that it creates a hardship. While it may be a great place for a vet, it's obviously not a good place for outdoor play yard. I think the noise and the smell from dogs being outdoors is something that you can't deal with a site-proof fence. So, congregate care facility on the frontage on Bryant, and then the back part of it that's directly adjacent to this would be either multifamily for over 50 or congregate care.
I would like to offer that the dogs will be taken outside. So they'll have to go outside to go to the bathroom. They'll be walked around the property either on leashes or inside the fence area. I think it's actually more secure to provide a fenced-in area for the dogs to play for limited amounts of time, supervised, of course, and then return to their interior runs.
Yeah, but not at this location, I don't think.
I think the hardship is that I think it's my interpretation that the original intent is to prevent outside keeping of dogs, which was the standard of care a long time ago. And our intent is not to keep dogs outside, just to allow them a space to play. I think that's our hardship. We'll have dogs will be taken outside one way or the other.
I mean, if you're going to have multifamily or congregate care to the PUD 1533, you're going to have people with dogs there anyway, taking them outside to begin with. So I could support this application. That's a motion.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any other discussion? Cast your votes. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 8, case number 13946, application for special exception of Abit LLC to allow a recreational vehicle park located at 3800 East Hefner Road.
Tim Johnson with Johnson Associates here on behalf of the applicant. This is an application for a special use permit on a piece of land that is located at Hefner and I-35. There are commercial use here on the frontage, which is not part of our property. What's in red is part of our property. If you've been by there lately, there's been some clearing in here and some work around in here, but the intent is to retain as many trees as possible. The clearing has been done to allow fill to be done. This is the major creek that runs through here that buffers this commercial from the RV and Hefner from the RV as it comes around and turns this corner. And so that to meet floodplain elevations, there's been fill put in here, but they've retained a lot of trees, and they intend to keep them. So the staff has not found this any objections to this. We don't know of any protest. We did receive a letter from Mr. Lance Benham, and we concur with his letter that our access needs to be limited, and it is based on this. And I believe the second part of his letter was to retain the screening of the trees.
Looking at the site plan that you have provided versus the map that the staff gives us, it looks to me like you're really not touching the part of the property north of the creek. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
It would be left as is?
The part that we own is going to be left alone.
Part of Mr. Benham's suggestion.
That's correct. And that's why we concur with his letter.
Do we have any protests? Any other questions?
Since you incorporated his references, I'd make a motion for approval.
Second.
Motion second. Any other discussion? Cast your votes.
Thank you.
You're good.
Item number 9, case number 13947, request of Matthew Cragen for a variance to the building setback and height requirements located at 320 North Broadway Avenue.
Good afternoon. My name is Matt Cragen, here representing the bank currently located at 320 North Broadway. Also with me, where'd he go? Is Mark Roush, the architect on the project. To briefly discuss the two variances that we are requesting, the first one is the height requirement of a 3-story building. The current use does not require, or there would not be the need for the 3 stories.
Can I ask you, what did the Downtown Review Committee recommend with respect to this property?
They met yesterday morning in a special session, and they recommended approval of both variants.
And is what you're about to do really just sort of replace the building that's there? Looking at the site plan we've been provided, I don't see a whole lot of difference.
Right. The current structure that this site is a unique structure. It has 2 above-ground buildings that total to about 2,000 square foot, and it has 21,000 square feet of underground building area.
It's those for old armored cars, wasn't it? Or what's the space?
Well, it used to be the office portion of it. There was offices and stuff. To make it more convenient for bank customers, the intent was to replace the existing above-ground lobby area with a more conventional bank structure that would have the offices, restrooms, everything above ground in that similar location to reutilize the existing utilities located below it in the basement.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
No problem. The other is just simply based on the geography of the site. Our building abuts 2 streets. We were able to get within 10 feet of 2 of the 3 streets. Gaylord, however, because of the shape and distance, the building footprint didn't facilitate getting within 10 foot of that street. In that area, we've decided, in working with the downtown committee, we've increased our landscaping as well as screening for parking along that street to provide a a pleasant view as you drive down the road.
In the interest of full disclosure, should I say that I bank at Chase Bank?
Probably.
And use this facility quite regularly?
Based upon the unique shape of the property and the fact that the Downtown Design Review Committee approved this, I'd make a motion to approve.
Do we have any protesters? Motion and a second. If there's no other discussion, cast your votes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 10, case number 13883, appeal of Bruce and Roberta Stover of the decision of the Historic Preservation Commission regarding the approval of a certificate of appropriateness for replacement of windows located at 427 Northwest 14th Street.
Mr. Chairman, I need to make a disclosure that the applicant and I go to church together and we serve on a lay commission, but I don't think that in any way is a conflict, unless anybody objects.
I should say that I actually have to leave here at 3:15. I don't know, since there are enough of us without me, whether that matters.
It's the same, they're both.
Good afternoon, David Box, 522 Colcord Drive.
I guess the point is that we may still be in the middle of this when she leaves.
Right.
You understand that?
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
Sure.
It's a risk I'm willing to take.
Yeah.
I'm here on behalf of the applicant. Also with me is Mr. Stover, the applicant homeowner. I'm handing around two separate exhibits. Exhibit number 1 is a staff report from the December 5th, 2012 HP Commission, and exhibit number 2 is a staff report from the March 5th, 2014 HP Commission. What we have is a bit of a unique situation. The house is located at 427 Northwest 14th Street. And my client, at the time of the HP Commission, was seeking approval for windows that are already in place. They are a Pella Architectural Grade Series, and based on certain comments made by some of the HP commissioners, he was not aware that he had the option to have his application denied and appeal that decision. So at the time, he agreed to what the HP Commission was forcing him to do. So what we're asking this board to do is take their approval of the application, their decision as a denial of the application, because what he applied for is not what they granted. So what we're basically saying is, yes, they approved something, but it was not what was applied for. So what was applied for was in effect denied by their motion and by their vote that day.
Wouldn't
Well, before we go any farther with that, I think it would be a great idea if you would go back to them and ask them for a denial.
Well,
that's
we already know what they're
I was going
going
to say is that I think probably jurisdictionally wise, the best thing for us to do, in case somebody opposes this, is to remand it back and get a denial, and then come back and see us.
I defer to staff, but we did have this has been continued for 7 months, and we have discussed that option, and I think what we reached was that their vote that day was a denial of the application.
Dan, can you give us any guidance on this?
Essentially, by agreeing to what the HP Commission had requested, they amended their application, and they got approval of an amended application. The fact that he may not have intended to amend that, I don't think makes any difference. It'd be similar to a Planning Commission case where somebody applied for C3 and the Planning Commission recommended O2, and they said, okay, we'll take that. Then they go to council and change their mind and go, no, we want C3 again. That's not what the board heard or the HP Commission heard. They approved an application. There's nothing to appeal on an approved application.
Well, like I said, this has been continued for 7 months.
The only thing I'd say, the only argument I could see that could be made is that we hear this de novo, and then we have the right to modify a decision. But if you run into protesters, I mean, it seems to me the better thing for you to do is to get a denial and come back.
Well, and if that's the will of the board, will do that. There were no protesters at the time of the HP Commission. There have been no protesters on the multiple times we've been set here. I'm confident that there will be no protests.
My view of it has nothing to do with whether there's protest or not. I really do think that would be the best thing to do.
Okay.
Frustrating, and I feel bad about it, but I think that's the safest way to handle this.
Okay. Well,
do we need to vote to remand?
Motion would be to remand to the...
I'll make a motion to remand this case back to the HPC.
Okay, any other discussion? Got a motion and a second? If not...
I don't want to be...
Oh, sorry.
I'm confused. We have the right to hear it de novo, but because what they applied for is not what they're asking now, we need to send it back to them, and then they need to come back to us if they disagree. Is that the procedural posture? Okay, thank you.
Okay, motion and a second. Cast your votes, please. Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Item number 11, case number 13915, appeal of Dr. Stephen B. Hopper of the decision of the Historic Preservation Commission regarding the denial of a certificate of appropriateness for replacement of windows located at 501 Northwest 41st Street.
Before we go on, and if it's I'm not out of order, I want to say, and I do understand that is frustrating, particularly I want to say to your client, and after the amount of time and energy you've invested in this, I know it's difficult. But for me, this was a threshold issue, whether in fact by agreeing to the decision of the HP Commission, there was anything left to appeal. So I think you will be removing an obstacle by taking this additional step, and I think it'll be best.
We can stipulate what the decision of the HP Commission will be.
Hi, I'm Barbara Chappell. I'm going to start this around. There's a key to it. These tabs are examples of windows currently in the Crown Heights neighborhood. There's only one example of what HP has asked us to do with our particular art.
My name is Stephen Hopper. I'm the homeowner. That's my wife, Barbara. This is Michael McMahill. He's our designer and contractor for this project. And I'm going to try to be as brief as possible to give you some idea of kind of what's happened so far in this process. We originally went before the Historic Preservation Commission to present a replacement of non-historic windows in a previously enclosed porch area that's off our bedroom. We, previous to this, had completely renovated our entire home internally and externally to make it historic. So we have kept all historic elements. We've taken paint off copper, taken paint off rock. We've replaced all the wood on the house, taken off all the aluminum siding, taken down all the aluminum storm windows. So this is our last project, and what we were asking for is to be able to have divided light windows, replacing what is currently kind of levered storm hurricane windows that are green glass. You might find that in our application. Okay, so what was previous there, they had enclosed that. They had put insulation board up against those windows. They had then put in a built-in closet with built-in fixtures. We've removed all the built-in fixtures. We took down all the insulation board. It has been heated and cooled. There is a vent that the previous homeowners had put into that space. When we went before the Planning Commission, they seemed, I think the discussion was they were uncomfortable granting semi-divided light because we were a prominent, quote-unquote, home on the corner, okay? And as a compromise, because there was a division amongst the members of that meeting in regard to whether they would allow that or not, A compromise was reached in which they suggested we put in non-divided light. I was not present. Mr. McMahill was. He said, well, if that's all we can get approved today, that's what we'll take. So they approved non-divided light for those windows, which was not acceptable to us. We want that space to be historic and to be similar to the other windows in our home.
In the book that's going around, at the top, there's a green tab. There's only one arched window in our neighborhood that faces a street that is like what HP has asked. And there's 34 examples of what we're asking for.
So they're asking you to conform with the exception, not the norm? Is that what you're trying to say?
Right.
Yeah.
So then we went back and we asked then again for a divided light. And
I'm sorry, specific to your request, is the one example something that was not original to, like an enclosed porch, or is it a main part of the house where
It's a front window. It's not a porch, but it's a front window.
it's part of the main house?
But it's arched.
Okay.
That's right.
If I just may clarify on that real quick, the window that she is referring to, I'm sure, is not an approved historic window. It was something that was done, and I'm sure in violation of those rules.
Okay. Right. But are you saying that your application was approved by the HPC with a variance? No. What was approved was something that we had not asked for. We had not asked for a non-divided light, and that's what they approved as a compromise to our proposal. So then when we went back to say that's really not what we had asked you to do, they then came and suggested that the issue was not semi-divided light, divided light. The issue was that they felt the porch should be differentiated from the rest of the home architecturally, and that the way to do that was to maintain the non-divided light window. So was there a denial? No, I'll get to that. So when we suggested to them that that really had never been the issue prior, they then postponed that meeting. They agreed that they would review the tapes from the prior meeting, and that we would then come back again to look at the issue. So we went back a third time, again asking for divided light, and then they denied our request for divided light, saying that they felt that non-divided light was what would differentiate our porch area from the rest of the home, okay, and that they wanted minimal architectural elements that might obstruct the idea that that was originally a porch. So what you have is two pictures of homes, one with the non-divided light that they have asked us to put in, and another picture of the semi-divided light that is in other homes in the neighborhood. Also, in the meantime, what we believe, whether this is a conspiracy theory or not, the HB had approved the very windows we were asking for in another historic home. This was in Heritage Hills. And we went back at that time saying, hey, you just approved the casement windows we are wanting to put in, and they are semi-divided light. And they said, well, that was replacing a historic window, okay, and yours is a non-historic window. So essentially, we will allow a historic window to be replaced with a semi-divided light, but we don't want you with a non-historic window to replace it with semi-divided.
But you're pretty confident that that window was installed before those guidelines existed, correct?
That was a different house.
That was a different house.
Different house.
They had just...
I'm talking about on your property, though.
Oh, on my property, yes. It was installed back in the late 50s. Katie, can you kind of bring us up to speed procedurally so I can make sure I understand this?
So the applicant initially applied
for two options. They proposed a true divided light window and a simulated divided light window. When we had the meeting, the commission was going back and forth between the true divided light window versus the simulated divided light. We have this challenge frequently because our guidelines specifically prohibit anything but a true divided light window within a historic structure. However, they also now allow for thermal pane windows, which means there's two panes of glass supported by the muntins instead of just a single pane of glass. When you go from a historic single pane window that's true divided light to a thermal pane window that's true divided light, the muntins have to get thicker because they're supporting double the weight. There's two panes of glass instead of one. So we frequently see proposals to replace historic windows with a simulated divided light so that the muntin width can be narrow and delicate like the historic single pane window. As the commission was discussing this case and going back and forth between the two different proposals, clearly wanting to follow their guidelines that we install true divided light windows, but also, considering that it would look more similar to the historic window, the applicant's representative kind of threw out off the cuff the suggestion of what if we just had no muntins? What if they were just a solid, undivided pane of glass? Once the commission discussed that, we said, our guidelines for enclosing historic porches actually do say that they should be left with minimal enclosures, that you should not make a historic porch look like the rest of the house and put historic windows in it, that it should be open and glassy and still present the fact that it was historically a porch. So based on that suggestion and based on that principle, the commission approved it with the condition that they just remove the muntins.
Then what happened?
So when the representative went back to the property owners with that agreed upon condition, they decided they didn't want to do that. They didn't like how that was going to look.
Not only that, you are suing people in my neighborhood to remove that very window from their homes. You do not consider that historic under any circumstance in my neighborhood. You're actually suing people, and people who have purchased a home from another owner who has that very window that you're wanting us to install. And we're not talking about new construction. We're not talking about the new enclosure of a porch, which that guideline specifically refers to. We're talking about a porch that was enclosed in the late 1950s. It is not the new enclosure of a porch, which that very guideline addresses. The only thing that is different from what we have proposed and everything else you've approved, okay, is the fact that we are wanting a simulated divided light on the front of a house. You have approved simulated divided light everywhere else in every other home. Then you approved simulated divided light on the front of a house with a casement window, which is exactly what we're asking for. Now, is that Heritage Hills home you're talking about?
And
what happened?
I would argue very, very strongly that we do not approve simulated divided light windows on homes. The particular case that you're mentioning, we have, other than the case that you're mentioning, that one specific home, the commission in that case approved a simulated divided light window so that it would closely replicate the historic casement window in that one case. Prior to that, in the time that I've been here, and after that, we have not approved simulated divided light windows within a historic structure. We do approve them on additions, and we approve them on new construction. That particular case...
What's the difference? Whoa, one at a time.
After that case, we actually had numerous discussions in meetings with other cases and in workshops about this kind of challenge between simulated divided light that's thermal pane and thicker versus or true divided light that's thermal pane and thicker and a simulated divided light that more closely replicates the muntins. And the commission felt very strongly that the priority was a true divided light window, even if that meant the muntins had to be a little thicker. That is something that has been upheld in not one but two revisions to the guidelines over the last 3 years. Those have gone through a very lengthy public process. And since that application was approved, we have not approved a simulated divided light window within a historic structure.
When was the workshop? How long ago was that?
Oh, gosh. We had 3 or 4 workshops talking about potential guideline revisions.
When was the approval of the home in Heritage Hills?
That was, I just looked at it and I don't remember now.
There's copies of it. You should have copies.
May 2013.
The home is in the package that you have.
Yeah, I see it.
The other thing I would say is, in the original argument in which we were talking about true divided light, what they were also saying is that we could not modify the opening of that window, including putting down a vapor barrier on the bottom part of the opening, that would be in violation. So what they were wanting us to do is to put a wood window directly upon the cement with water that currently seeps into that area, which we would have had, again, wood rot, which we've now replaced everything on the house for that reason. And then the other issue was that the muttons are going to be a half-inch wider than anything else on our home. And if we're looking at historic continuity of a home, I just don't think their guidelines are quite up to the technology. The technology is right here. This is a simulated divided light window, and that's what we're wanting to put in the home. There's no way that anybody can tell that that is any different than any other house in the neighborhood. Okay, so the home, let me make sure I follow this. The home in Heritage Hills that was approved, was that the Wigan Revocable Trust home at 301 Northwest 18th?
Yes, yes.
And it has divided light?
Yes.
Okay. And that was done this year? Oh, 2013?
That was done 2013,
last year.
yes.
Okay. And explain to me again the difference, the exception allowed here and not allowed in this instance?
What the commission looked at with that application was that it was very tall, narrow, original casement windows all over the house that were going to be replaced, and that the muntins on a true divided light window were going to be noticeably thicker than the historic window. So when they approved that application, they determined that a simulated divided light window with narrower muntins would be preferable. That was the first time they'd approved something like that in quite a while. I don't know past cases on that.
I kind of know. This is where I kind of get this. I understand you guys had these workshops and you vetted this, but they had their approval on May 1st, 2014, effective the 14th, expired on May 14th, 2014. So now the applicants or the appellates before us had a hearing on May 7th, 2014, and you were still within. In the case, in the Heritage Hills case, it was still within their time frame to make the modification.
The Heritage Hills was 2013.
I understand that, but they had a year to install it. So,
well, yeah.
And so in this year period, you had these workshops and decided this was, and the appellants were relying on that as their argument on appeal. So I kind of feel like that.
Well, I would say there's
the time frame's a little.
The issue is not just this case was heard, they had workshops and changed their minds. The issue is also that it's two completely different situations. It's a previously enclosed porch, not a historic interior portion of the house. So our guidelines talk about, in general, when you're removing inappropriate historic fabric, which is what I think we would all agree the existing windows are, you go back with what is appropriate. And so when we started discussing the guidelines about enclosing a historic porch, the commission felt that the most appropriate thing was not to install replicas of the historic windows, because that falsely suggested that this was originally part of the historic house, that the more appropriate thing was to have a different type of window in the porch so it still reads architecturally as a porch.
So every home in Heritage Hills, every home in Crown Heights, but a few, okay, have their porches enclosed exactly in a way that preserves the historic integrity of the entire home. It's to make the entire home look as though, all right, this is how it was historically built. All right, no one is trying to take all of those homes in Heritage Hills, Crown Heights, and have people take out their divided light windows, which makes their porches look like part of the house, so as to make it look like a porch again. All right? And what she's basically telling you is, if we had a historic window that we were replacing, they would be happy to approve this window. But because we're replacing a non-historic window, they're not wanting us to do that. It does not make any sense to me. By the way, Tulsa, Dallas, they approved this window. All right? I don't understand why here in Oklahoma City we can't get a little, we're arguing over these little nuances when really the issue is, okay, we've now moved to the ability to have thermal pane windows, and we've moved to the ability to have a window that looks historic, even though it is not true divided light. I don't know why the issue is still being brought before this commission time and time again.
I'll just add one final comment that we do not approve those windows in existing historic structures except for, as far as I know, this one case that they've cited, and after that was approved, the commission was very uncomfortable with it. Be it that as it may, that in some historic districts and some historic commissions in other places, they approve simulated divided light windows. So far, this commission has not revised their guidelines to allow that in historic structures. The guidelines were completely rewritten in 2012 with an extensive public process and extensive input from residents of all the historic districts, and that guideline remained intact and was not changed. So I think to say that that's not fair to a property owner because everyone in the historic districts and everyone who's part of the historic preservation process agreed to it is not fair.
Okay, just articulate for me. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think that was a bridge too far there. I don't think everybody agreed to it. I think that's a little too much to say. I should probably tell you all that I actually live in Crown Heights. And as one of those people who has to live with the realities of an 85-year-old home and the restrictions of anything you want to do to the house, we'll set aside why Oklahoma City hasn't, joined the 21st century yet. That's really not part of this discussion. We're not in a position to say, and so we've decided we're going to change how the HP Commission looks at windows. I do feel the need, however, to say that I am very uncomfortable with, it's funny that I would say it that way, with a situation where the HP Commission is making these decisions based on how they feel about things. The restraints of living in an HP district and the requirements and the approvals, it's very, I won't go so far as to say onerous. It's cumbersome. It's difficult. I'm not telling you anything. And so I think it's important that it be clear and that people understand what they're biting off when they buy a home in one of these districts. The idea that sometimes it's this and sometimes it's that, or that we did it this way once, but then we decided that was a bad idea, that doesn't get there for me. I don't think that that's the appropriate way for us to be dealing with this.
I agree. I don't live in the HP, and that's by choice because I'm an accountant and I can't handle how to, I'd be going nuts with this argument right now, but with your relying on that case, that was the anomaly. I'm very sympathetic to that, and I think that it's just, we do need to have more consistent guidelines, and they need to be enforced with more uniformity, and I realize that that's very difficult, Katie, for you guys to do, because you'll have a house that is in the HP, but may have been built in 1987 because something was burned down, and that happened. So I know I'm sympathetic to both arguments, but I just think that they relied on what you guys said.
I would just add, I think this was a very difficult case for us. It was a difficult case for staff. By and large, when we look at window replacements, it is extremely clear-cut, and applicants know exactly what's going to be required when they're replacing a historic window to match a historic window. With this, we had an original porch that had been enclosed later with inappropriate windows, and had that debate of what is the most appropriate thing to go back here, a window that matches the house, something different. So it was a big challenge for the commission. I just want to defend the commission in most of their decision-making process.
I'm not being critical of the commission in any way, shape, or form. They have to make very fine, detailed judgment calls and based on the decisions they have, and it was a job that I would never want. And
it's a tough job.
It's a tough job.
But what I still haven't heard articulated in the commission's decision was, and this is the standard, what is the adverse effect on the historical character by doing this?
The adverse effect of installing, simulated or installing divided light windows of any kind was that would falsely represent the porch as having been part of the original house. I know porches all over all of our historic districts.
Is that part of a guideline? Is that a part of a rule?
Yes.
Because is that 367? 3-6-7?
Is it part of the rule for enclosing a new structure?
That guideline comes from guidelines that talk about enclosing a previously open porch.
So that's new. This is existing.
Right. This is existing. But it's a porch that was enclosed non-historically, if that makes any sense.
I mean, show me where you can. That's what I can't figure out. How do we know that? We know that there was a time we didn't have these guidelines in Oklahoma City, and changes to properties were made. And now we have these guidelines, and so now going forward, we have to, if we live in an HP district, we have to apply those guidelines. And I just don't get how they're adversely affected by wanting to do what they're proposing, or how you're adversely affected.
And honestly, when we had the submission to do either true divided light or simulated divided light, staff was completely supportive of approving the true divided light windows. Those met all of our guidelines for replacement windows. We didn't see any objection to it. When the suggestion was made that they use windows without muntins at all, the commission thought, well, maybe that's actually a better idea, because it does accomplish this preservation concept of differentiating the porch. I still think if they came back with a true divided light wood window, it would have a very good chance of getting approved, but the commission feels pretty strongly about not approving simulated divided light windows within a historic structure, regardless of what was approved in one other case with some fairly unique circumstances.
But you approve it in all of your additions and add-ons. What's the difference?
Those are not historic structures, and they're usually at the rear and minimally visible from the street. Sorry, we're supposed to address you guys.
If you'd address the...
I would like to just say something real quick. There are no houses in Crown Heights with enclosed porches that have the same detail that HP is asking us to do. Not one. All of them, every single home with an enclosed porch has divided light windows. Every one of them. And this is the only house that would have non-divided light windows that's enclosing a porch enclosure. I just want to make that perfectly clear.
I can't speak to that one way or the other, but from the applications we see, I would say that's not accurate. We have porches that have been enclosed. The house was built in the 30s and the porch was enclosed in the 40s. We have porches that were enclosed in the 80s, and I would say there's a wide range of window types in enclosed porches throughout Oklahoma City.
None like the HP Commission approved.
There is one exception, and that's the one marked at green at the top. There's one window with an arch. That is, and there's 34 examples of what we're asking for.
I cannot affirm the decision of the HP board. And I know every situation is unique, and I don't want to be, I think what you're trying to do is a good thing. I don't see how it adversely affects the historic character of the property. So I cannot go forward and affirm the decision of the board, so I would have to make a motion that we reverse the decision for the certificate of appropriateness and allow the windows as presented.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second. Any other discussion, comments? If not, the motion is to reverse the decision. Did I say that right? Yes, sir. Okay. Cast your votes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, appreciate it.
This is the second time I've been in front of you, and they've both been really positive experiences, and I really appreciate it.
We appreciate that. We don't always get that.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, be no further business, I will make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Cast your votes. Okay, thank you.